welcome back Bryan Reynolds from the Butterflies of the World Foundation. Well, Bryan, before we start looking at this month's flock of flyers, I wanted to look at some nectar resources to attract adult butterflies.
Yes, a lot of people plant gardens, obviously, to have the beauty of the flowers, but another side benefit of that is it attracts butterflies for nectar.
I assume we want a nice diversity of plants in that garden.
You always have to consider butterflies are different sizes, and here in Oklahoma the smallest is pinky nail size, all the way up to the largest, like the swallowtails, which could be about 4 inches across. And because of their different size of anatomy, they have different sizes of proboscis also, and prefer different size flowers because of that.
Okay, so for our smallest butterflies, they would have the shortest proboscis or feeding mouth parts. We want some small flowers, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Or small flowers, or larger flowers that have small nectaries in them.
Okay.
And perfect example would be the black-eyed Susans. They're an excellent nectar source, kind of a generalist nectar source, so you see a lot of different species on it, including the small hair streaks and blues.
Okay. Moving up into the medium-sized butterflies, what would be good for those?
The various mints are perfect, and here we can see a ton of skippers on them. We have both the sachem and the fiery skippers working them pretty hard. And another side benefit with this is that all the different floral or the flower pieces are all close together, and so they don't have to travel very far. They can kind of just get on one and work it and hit all the different spots.
Very florific.
And here we have another perfect example of a medium size that just landed.
Oh yeah, and the salvias. So salvias will take up the medium butterflies and a little bit longer too, right?
Yes.
They're a bit deeper, so the relationship of where that nectar is to the flower, you have to reach in a little bit farther to get it.
Exactly.
We don't have our daylilies blooming, but they have a really big flower. Do we find any butterflies on those?
Surprisingly, yes. I've seen large swallowtails on there pretty frequently. They have to kind of work their way in there, but there must be plenty of nectar for them to get in there that hard. So yes, definitely a good nectar source for the larger species.
Okay. Now you mentioned on the mints that there's a lot of flowers close together. I think a great example of that would be plants in the asters, the composites.
Yes.
Like we have here.
That's an excellent, excellent source of nectar for butterflies that are small, and they can land on that. And each one of those little florets has nectar in it, and so you see them just landing and walking around, hitting every little aspect of that flower, hitting every little floret.
And you know, a lot of our viewers might not realize, but when you're mentioning that, is inside of here, each of these is a little flower.
Yes.
And so that's just loaded with flowers and of course nectar and pollen as well.
And also it saves on the energy. If all those little flowers are clumped together in one spot, the butterfly doesn't have to fly constantly from one flower to another. It can just stand right there, walk around, and they're lazy. So
Some other examples of composites in the garden?
The echinacea, the coneflowers, the Rudbeckia, the black-eyed Susans, the sunflowers.
Like we have the helianthus.
The helianthus.
Now behind you is a milkweed. Tell me about this one and who we might find on it.
Well, this is one of the non-native milkweeds. This is the tropical milkweed. We have plenty of other native examples as well. And they're not a composite, however, they tend to clump their florets all together in one spot, and again, it makes it easy for the butterfly just to kind of climb around and walk around on that. So another good example.
Now you mentioned that this is the tropical. We do have a native milkweed in our garden as well, and many of these plants are either introduced, they're not native, but we kind of have the brothers to those or the sisters to those in our native garden here. We have the native milkweed. There's native salvias and a native Rudbeckia. Well, most of the Rudbeckias are native as well. And I think that's important as well, that there's a lot of options there for gardeners.
Well, you have some people who tend to prefer only the natives, and that's great. And then others that like a variety, and some that go for the exotics. The key is for that is, what do the butterflies like? And some of the non-natives are really good, but the butterflies in this area have grown up with the native flowers, and that's what they're used to, and so they're another excellent source of nectar.
Bryan, a lot of our ornamental flowers have been really hybridized, highly bred, to make the flower more just showier, more attractive. How does that influence the nectar resources for butterflies?
Well, it could dramatically influence it. If you're looking just for showiness in the garden, sometimes the morphology changes to the point that there's not as much nectar, or the nectaries are a lot harder to reach.
Okay.
And this is a perfect example. You have the same kind of flower.
Yeah, here's the regular.
And that one is very attractive to a butterfly. They can land on that and have ample nectar, whereas this one here, they'd have to work pretty hard to get in there to get some of that.
Those nectaries are just deeper in there, so maybe their proboscis isn't long enough to
Absolutely.
reach them.
And if they had a choice, they'd much rather use that variety than this variety.
Well, let's take a look at seasonality. We want to have flowers all year throughout the garden. As we think about providing a diversity of resources, we want to think about when they bloom as well, right?
Yes, that's one thing people do when they plant flower gardens, is to have a continuous bloom of various flowers all through the growing season. That also really benefits the butterflies. You have them open early in the spring, different kinds will open in the summer and fall and so on.
I noticed that here, last time you were here, we were really watching that salvia over here.
It was a butterfly magnet.
It was, but it's kind of done, so I imagine the butterflies are going to move on.
Yes, as the months go by, those will stop blooming. And then you got the blanket flower here and the butterfly bush now that are the main nectar sources.
So early in the spring, what are some of the plants that are really good for attracting butterflies?
Well, you have the yarrows, the verbenas.
Right, yeah, that homestead purple's a real early bloomer.
Yes.
Amsonia is one of my favorites, and I love it for the fall color, but it has spring blooms as well.
Absolutely, yes.
So another plant that's always really attractive here in the spring is our ground cover phloxes,
Yes.
the beautiful flowers, but there's also summer phlox.
That's right. So during the season, depending on if you have hybridized varieties that bloom at different times, that'd be perfect.
Now when we're looking at fall, this has been a weird summer. Our goldenrod's blooming very early.
Yes. Another excellent nectar source in the fall. That plus the liatris is another good one.
Yeah, late season. I also have a cup flower, Silphium.
Yes.
And some of the helianthus. We looked at a helianthus that's blooming now, but we have a few.
Yes, I've seen butterflies all over, like the Maximilian sunflowers is another good variety.
Now we've been looking at the time throughout the seasons. Do this vary time of day as well?
Yes, believe it or not, as most people know, some flowers open at different times of the day, and also at the same time, some flowers will release their nectar at different times of the day.
Okay.
So you'll notice in your garden, all the butterflies kind of congregated on one kind of flower, and then as the day progresses, they'll move over to a different variety. And so if you have that variety, not just seasonally, but also through the time of the day, you're going to have a lot more butterflies in your garden.
So it seems diversity is certainly key here.
Yes.
Now some of these nectar resources are also larval plants as well.
That's a dual benefit, yes. Like the milkweeds is an example. We just saw a beautiful queen today. That's a cousin to the monarch, and their caterpillars also eat milkweeds. So you have both monarchs and queen butterflies very interested in all the milkweed you have in your garden, not only for the nectar, but also because they're going to lay their eggs on it and you have caterpillars.
And those milkweeds, the different types of milkweed, bloom at different times of
That's
the
right.
year as well.
You have
So
the
we
green
another
milkweeds
benefit.
early, then you have the butterfly weeds after that, and then the tropical milkweed is blooming right now. So you have that progression again through the season.
Well, tell me about who's flying right now. What do we want to look for out in the gardens?
Well, we saw that beautiful queen today.
Yes.
That was another gorgeous butterfly, and its cousin, the monarch, is also out pretty good right now.
What are some of the other showy butterflies out now?
Well, right now, some of the bigger ones would be the swallowtails, and Oklahoma has about 6 varieties, such as the eastern tiger swallowtail or the state butterfly, the black swallowtail.
Okay. There's also some fritillaries flying.
Yes, some really nice ones. 2 that people really have to watch out for would be the regal fritillary and the Diana fritillary. Both of those eat violets as caterpillars, and they are stunning butterflies and a much sought after butterfly by butterfly watchers.
Excellent. This morning we saw a white. Tell me about that.
Yes, that was a checkered white. Should be a very common garden visitor.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. Next month we're going to look at some of the larval host plants. So we've started with the adults and we'll see what we can do to encourage the larvae.
Sounds good.
Thank you.